When we're talking about testing, I think coming back around to also what is an assay for? It's for generating a measurement, reporting a result one way or the other, and an often overlooked aspect of, I guess, de-risking, right, is like evaluating the data that's been collected, right, and what data needs to be sort of handled, and how does that impact the architecture of the system? You want to talk about that in your experience?
Sure. Yeah. And I think there's kind of two pieces to it. If you think about it from a sort of data and algorithm perspective, there's the algorithm itself, right? So you're getting some kind of raw data, which itself is probably not going to tell you what you need to do, and then you're doing some kind of algorithm on that to produce a result. And the other piece of it is just the, um, I guess you could call the infrastructure to generate and handle that data, which is whether you have a computer inside of this device or what kind of processor it is, or how you're just moving that data around, whether you're doing that processing on the instrument or if you're offloading it to a laboratory system, an LIS or something. So kind of the architecture framework of that data and processing. I think the second one is becoming a little bit more of a big consideration on IVD platforms, just because of how commonplace sequencing is becoming, right? So when you run sequencing, you're generating, terabytes of data that has to, be generated and stored somewhere and transmitted. And, as fast as computers and Ethernet systems are, it's still a non-trivial consideration of where you're putting that data and how you're storing it long-term, how you're processing it. Um, so, those considerations are, can be sort of hidden, since they're kind of the software considerations. And we all kind of joke about how you could fix problems in software, which is not true. You shouldn't just fix everything in software. But that quip is kind of based on the idea that it's hard to see what's going on there, algorithmically, and from a data processing perspective. So I don't know if that quite answered your question, but
No, it did. I think the two-part aspect of it definitely makes sense to me. I mean, one of the things I see a lot is like, what sample of blood were you using, right? Like simple questions like that, if they're not documented well or consistent, you don't really know um, what the data really means, right? That's number one. You're demonstrating your measurement first, like what were the conditions, and then secondly, yes, to your points about architecting the right platform. Yeah.
yeah, I guess, yeah. When you think about data, there's kind of, again, two pieces to it. There's the data that you're generating as a product of processing, but I think you're talking about data um, for your program, right? The data on how many runs out of 1,000 were successful, or how many milliliters of blood did you need for this run, or you know what was the exact temperature of your thermocycling subsystem throughout. Um, which in a lot of ways is an even more challenging problem, right? Because you don't have the infrastructure for that data collection at the start, and you also don't necessarily know what data it's going to be that you're going to care about. So it would be nice to, and we've had this experience, in our obviously years of developing products, where um, a client might be really, really conscientious about trying to get a lot of good data on their instruments. So we've even had clients who've kind of drafted electronics diagrams for what their instrument should look like, at least from a prototyping perspective. And on paper, it looks great because you have pressure measurements at every point in the cartridge. You have temperature measurements everywhere. Um,
Practical.
yeah, yeah. At a certain point, you've got a circuit board that's that big, and the a long you spent a long time developing software for that. So even in the prototyping phase, there is a sort of trade off, or cost benefit analysis to be done on how much do you care about gathered data versus how quickly do you want your prototype, so that your assay team can start developing that automated assay on your platform.